The Galactic War had raged for years, a brutal conflict that had torn apart countless civilizations. Among the many powers fighting for control of the galaxy, one empire stood above all others: the Zorathian Empire. Their technology was unmatched, their war machines terrifying, and their reach stretched far beyond most of the other species in the galaxy. The Galactic Alliance, formed by numerous species to resist the Zorathian threat, had already suffered massive losses. Entire planets had fallen, entire fleets destroyed, and hope was rapidly dwindling. Earth, once considered an insignificant primitive planet, was now at the forefront of the Alliance's last stand. The humans had proven their resilience, fighting with an unyielding determination that surprised the other galactic powers. But now, as the Zorathians pressed their advantage, even Earth's forces were beginning to buckle under the immense pressure. The human soldiers fought valiantly, but the Zorathians seemed unstoppable. On a small distant planet at the edge of Alliance space, a major battle was underway. The skies were filled with the sound of distant explosions, and the ground shook beneath the weight of incoming attacks. Earth's forces, led by Commander Lyris, had established a defensive perimeter around the planet's main city. But despite their best efforts, the Zorathians were relentless, pushing forward with their advanced weaponry and overwhelming numbers. Commander Lyris stood on the balcony of the command center, looking out at the chaos unfolding below. The sight was a grim one. The Zorathians had already breached the outer defenses, and their warships were raining down fire upon the planet's surface. Human forces were doing everything they could to hold the line, but it was clear they were outmatched. The human soldiers were brave, but they were facing an enemy with technology far beyond their own. Lyris clenched her fists, her heart heavy with the weight of the situation. She had lost so much already: friends, soldiers, and now her own family. Her homeworld, Earth, had sent everything they could to assist the Alliance, but now it seemed like it would be for nothing. If the Zorathians weren't stopped here, Earth itself could be next. She turned away from the balcony and back into the war room. Her eyes were bloodshot, her body exhausted from days of constant fighting. Her team was gathered around the table, their faces grim, as the holographic display flickered with real-time battle updates. The Alliance was losing. The human forces were barely holding on. Captain Lyris, one of her officers, Commander Bonner, spoke up, his voice tense. "The Zorathian warship, Invictus, is approaching. It's bigger than anything we've encountered. We won't be able to stop it. If it reaches the planet, we're done for." Lyris stared at the projection of the massive warship, its sleek, black surface reflecting the red light of the dying planet below. The Invictus was the Zorathian flagship, a massive vessel that housed hundreds of thousands of troops and weapons capable of destroying entire fleets in a single blast. It was the most powerful warship ever built by the Zorathians, and it was heading straight for them. "We can't let it get any closer," Lyris said, her voice filled with determination. "Prepare all remaining ships for a final defense. We'll make our stand here." Just as the orders were being given, something strange happened. A signal, faint but unmistakable, came through the command center's communication system. The message was short, cryptic, and completely unexpected. "The fleet is ready." Lyris froze, staring at the message in disbelief. The voice that spoke it was unfamiliar, yet there was something about it that seemed to stir something deep within her. She immediately turned to her communications officer. "What is this? Where is this message coming from?" The officer quickly ran a scan, but the result only deepened the mystery. "We can't pinpoint the source, Captain. It's coming from outside the usual transmission range. It's not from any of our ships." Lyris felt a wave of confusion wash over her. Who could be sending this message? And what did it mean? Was it a trap, or was there hope after all? Then, as if on cue, the sky above them suddenly ripped open. A blinding flash of light illuminated the heavens, and an immense shadow passed over the battlefield. For a moment, the ground fell silent, as if the entire world had stopped in awe of what was unfolding before their eyes. Lyris blinked in disbelief. A fleet. But it wasn't just any fleet. It was human. Sleek, dark warships, unlike anything the Zorathians had seen before. They emerged from cloaking fields, their surfaces shimmering in the light as they cut through the sky like knives. The ships were unlike any that had been seen in the galaxy. The Zorathians, in their arrogance, had never thought to consider the possibility that humanity might possess such advanced technology. The first wave of Zorathian missiles screamed toward the human fleet, but in an instant, the human ships deployed a series of EMP blasts, sending the projectiles crashing to the ground in midair. The Zorathian warships, which had been so sure of their victory, found themselves facing a new, unexpected threat. "Impossible," muttered Commander Bonner as he stared at the unfolding spectacle. "Where did these ships come from? We had no idea humanity had this kind of fleet." Lyris' mind raced. She had never seen anything like this before. The human ships moved with deadly precision, easily outmaneuvering the slower Zorathian warships. Each strike from the human fleet was calculated, devastating. It was as if the tide of the battle had shifted in an instant. These ships, they were hidden, Lyris whispered in awe. Earth must have been planning this for years, but why didn't we know? The human fleet didn't hesitate. They launched into the battle with a fury, overwhelming the Zorathian forces with an arsenal of high-tech weaponry. The Zorathian warships, despite their superior numbers and firepower, were no match for the precision and power of the human ships. Every attack seemed to land perfectly, every move a calculated blow to the enemy's heart. The battle raged on, and the Zorathians began to retreat. But it wasn't enough. The Invictus was still coming. Its massive size and firepower were unmatched. It was closing in fast, and if it reached the planet, it would spell the end for Earth and the Galactic Alliance. As the human fleet continued to battle, Lyris knew they couldn't rely on this sudden intervention forever. The real fight was yet to come. The Invictus was coming, and it would take everything they had to stop it. But for the first time in weeks, Lyris felt a glimmer of hope. The war wasn't lost yet. Humanity had something the Zorathians didn't: surprise and a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The tide had turned, but the real battle was just beginning. The battle was far from over. The arrival of the human fleet had shifted the momentum, but the threat of the Zorathian Empire was far from vanquished. As the mysterious human warships tore through the skies, ripping apart Zorathian forces with stunning precision, questions began to swirl among the Alliance ranks. Where had these ships come from? Why hadn't humanity shared such advanced technology with the rest of the galaxy? From a distance, the human fleet appeared almost otherworldly. Sleek, dark warships with smooth angular lines, their surfaces shimmering in the fading light of battle. Each ship was like a living creature, moving with fluid grace, effortlessly avoiding enemy fire. The Zorathian ships, despite their advanced weaponry, were being torn apart, their defensive shields faltering under the relentless assault. The humans had come prepared in a way no one had anticipated. In the heart of the human fleet, a series of massive command ships gleamed. Each one was controlled by an advanced AI system that had been designed specifically for warfare. The human AI was unlike anything the Zorathians had ever encountered: intelligent, precise, and adaptive. Unlike Zorathian commanders, who relied on their species' superiority, the human AI systems made split-second decisions with cold efficiency. The ships didn't just respond to commands. They anticipated them, predicting enemy movements and striking before the Zorathians could react. One by one, Zorathian warships began to fall. Their massive, intimidating forms slowly dwindled, picked apart by the pinpoint accuracy of human firepower. The human fleet had brought advanced energy weapons, cannons that fired pure plasma, capable of cutting through the thickest armor. EMP blasts disabled enemy electronics, rendering entire squadrons of Zorathian fighters useless. Stealth technology cloaked the human ships, making them almost invisible to enemy sensors. Each human ship was a force of nature, and no Zorathian ship was a match for them. The Zorathians, who had once believed they were the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, were now scrambling. Their forces were being decimated, and their superior numbers didn't seem to matter anymore. The human fleet was too fast, too precise, too lethal. However, despite the dramatic shift in the battle, the true power of humanity still remained shrouded in mystery. Where did they get this technology? Captain Lyris wondered aloud as she watched the human ships tear through the enemy lines. This isn't the fleet Earth had before. They'd been hiding this for years. Why? The Alliance commanders were equally baffled. They had always seen humanity as the underdog. Brave, yes, but outmatched in terms of technology. The humans had contributed much to the war effort, but their ships had been simple, traditional vessels, nothing like what they were seeing now. These ships were advanced beyond anything the Alliance had ever witnessed. The human forces were clearly holding back something monumental. It's as if they've been preparing for this moment all along, Bonner remarked, his voice filled with awe and suspicion. But why didn't they share this with us earlier? Why hide such power? The questions lingered in the air, unanswered and unsettling. The Alliance was already suspicious of humanity's sudden technological leap. After all, Earth had always been viewed as a relatively insignificant species in the grand scheme of galactic politics. The Zorathians had long underestimated them, dismissing them as primitive. Now, it seemed that humanity was not only capable of defending itself, but was the key to defeating the Empire. But that suspicion would have to wait. The battle wasn't over yet. In the distance, the Invictus, the Zorathian flagship, loomed large, a massive, imposing presence on the battlefield. It was unlike anything the human fleet had faced. Its sheer size was awe-inspiring, and its weapons were said to be powerful enough to obliterate entire fleets in seconds. Despite the fall of the smaller Zorathian warships, the Invictus remained a looming threat, one that would have to be dealt with before victory could be claimed. As the human fleet continued its relentless assault on the remaining Zorathian forces, Lyris and her team focused their attention on the Invictus. The massive warship was slowly advancing, its heavy cannons aimed at the planet below. If it reached the atmosphere, Earth's last hope would be extinguished. "We have to take it down," Lyris muttered, her eyes fixed on the approaching flagship. "We can't let it reach the planet." But the Invictus was not an easy target. It was equipped with the most advanced shielding technology the Zorathians had, capable of withstanding even the most powerful attacks. The human fleet, despite its technological superiority, was still outnumbered and outgunned in terms of sheer firepower. They needed more than just speed and precision to defeat the Invictus. A tense silence fell over the command room as Lyris stared at the advancing enemy warship. The human fleet had proved itself capable of holding its ground, but the Invictus was a different beast altogether. It wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of the Zorathian Empire's dominance, a powerful weapon designed to crush anything in its path. If humanity was going to win this war, it would have to find a way to bring down the Invictus. "The Invictus is still a major threat," Bonner said, his voice low. "We can't rely on just our fleet. We need something more." Lyris nodded, a cold determination setting in. "Prepare the backup plan. The human fleet may have hidden their technology, but we still have an advantage they don't know about." It was clear that humanity was holding something back, something even the Alliance hadn't fully grasped. They had been hiding their power for years, and now it was time to reveal it. But would it be enough to defeat the Invictus? Or was this last-ditch effort merely a desperate attempt to slow the inevitable? The battle raged on, and the human fleet continued to dismantle the Zorathian assault. But as the Invictus drew closer, the tension grew. Time was running out. Humanity's secret fleet had taken the Zorathians by surprise, but could it be enough to defeat their ultimate weapon? Lyris watched as the human ships deployed a new set of weapons. They hadn't used them yet, and it was clear that they were holding back for a reason. "This is it," she whispered to herself, her mind racing. "We have to hit the Invictus now, or we'll lose everything." With a sudden surge of energy, the human fleet launched a new wave of attacks. It wasn't just missiles or plasma blasts. It was something far more devastating. Massive shockwaves of energy rippled across the battlefield as the human ships deployed their ultimate weapon, a singularity cannon capable of creating temporary black holes. The first blast struck the Invictus, its shields flickering under the strain. The second blast hit again, and the Invictus shuddered as a section of its hull was torn apart. But even as the Invictus began to falter, the war wasn't over. The Zorethians would not give up so easily. They still had forces in reserve, and the human fleet, despite its hidden power, had not yet won. The battle was far from over. But for the first time, there was hope. The air was thick with tension as the battle raged on. The Zorethian forces had been pushed back, but the fight was far from over. Despite the arrival of humanity's secret fleet, the human soldiers still felt the weight of the conflict pressing down on them. The once quiet and peaceful life they had known now seemed like a distant memory, and all that remained was the war, endless and consuming. For Captain Lyris, the emotional toll was becoming unbearable. As the fleet continued to press forward, she stood at the command deck of the human flagship, her face hard but her heart torn. She had been fighting for this moment, fighting for the survival of the human race and the entire Galactic Alliance. Yet every step forward seemed to bring more loss. The last communication from her family had been a haunting one. A simple message: "We're safe for now. We love you." That was all. The static that followed had been the cruel reminder that her family was now trapped, lost in the middle of a war they had never asked for. Lyris had no idea if they were still alive. She didn't know if she'd ever see them again. As her mind wandered to her family, a series of explosions rocked the battlefield. She snapped back to reality, her soldiers rallying around her as the human fleet fought to hold off the remaining Zorethian forces. Despite the chaos, Lyris kept her composure. She had to. The crew depended on her strength. But as much as she tried to push the pain away, it lingered. Every explosion, every loss, reminded her of what she had to lose. The weight of command was heavy, and the fear of losing more weighed heavily on her shoulders. Yet there was a flicker of hope, just a tiny spark, that humanity could still turn the tide. But the questions that haunted her were constant. How long could they keep fighting? How many more would have to die before the war was over? In the midst of this emotional turmoil, a familiar voice broke through the haze. It was Bonner, one of the longest-serving soldiers in the human fleet. His deep voice, filled with the resolve of someone who had been through countless battles, was a constant presence at Lyris' side. He had been there since the beginning, fighting beside her and the rest of the crew. He was more than just a soldier. He was a friend, a brother in arms. "Captain," Bonner said, his voice steady but tense, "we've got this. We just need to keep pushing forward. We've got a chance, and we can't afford to waste it." Lyris turned to him, her eyes meeting his with gratitude. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Bonner. Every time I look at the battlefield, I see the faces of those I've lost. My family, my people. I can't lose any more of them." Bonner placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort. "We've been through worse, Lyris. We've fought against impossible odds before, and we've always come out on top. We'll do it again." Lyris nodded, though her heart felt heavy. She knew Bonner was right. They had come so far, but the stakes had never been higher. The Zorethian Empire was powerful, and the human fleet was still outnumbered. Every battle felt like a desperate last stand. As the human fleet pressed forward, the Zorethians began to adapt. They changed their tactics, targeting critical energy sources on the planet that powered the human defenses. Without these energy sources, the human fleet would be vulnerable. The battle was becoming more complicated, and the stakes higher with each passing minute. Lyris watched as her soldiers fought bravely, but even she couldn't deny the truth. Time was running out. The Invictus, the Zorethian flagship, was still looming overhead, its massive cannons aimed at the heart of the planet. If it succeeded in its mission, it would destroy everything. A sudden explosion broke through the tense silence, and Lyris turned just in time to see Bonner, the man who had been a pillar of strength for so many, throw himself into the fray. A bombing raid from the Zorathians had taken aim at the human command ship, and Bonner had seen it coming. With no time to warn anyone else, he had acted on instinct. In that moment, Bonner's selfless courage became his final act. He threw himself in front of Lyris, shielding her from the blast with his own body. The explosion sent shockwaves through the air, knocking Lyris off her feet. Her ears rang with a deafening noise, and her vision blurred as she scrambled to stand. When she looked up, her heart sank. Bonner was gone. The loss hit her like a freight train. He had been more than a soldier. He had been her closest friend, her rock in the midst of this endless war. Now, in a single moment, he was gone. She could hardly believe it. Bonner had given his life to protect her, to protect all of them. Lyris stood motionless for a long moment, her breath shallow, her mind reeling. Her soldiers gathered around her, but the grief in their eyes was too much. Bonner had been a leader among them, a symbol of strength and resilience. His death left a void that no one could fill. One of the soldiers, a young man named Thorn, stepped forward. His voice cracked with emotion as he spoke. "Captain, we can't let this be in vain. We need to finish what we started. For Bonner." The words hit Lyris like a surge of energy. Bonner's sacrifice couldn't be for nothing. The human fleet had to continue. They had to keep fighting, not just for their families, not just for the future, but for the friends they had lost along the way. For Bonner. Lyris straightened, wiping away the tears that had begun to fall. She felt a fire ignite within her, one fueled by grief and anger. The Zorathians would pay for this. They would not win. She would not let them win. The action continued, but now there was a sense of urgency, of finality. The human fleet pushed forward, dealing devastating blows to the Zorathian forces, but the Invictus still remained. The planet's energy sources were being targeted one by one, and the humans fought desperately to protect them. As the final assault began, Lyris knew they couldn't afford any more losses. She couldn't afford to lose anyone else. But the fight was far from over. The Zorathians, with their ruthless tactics and superior technology, were relentless, and even though the human fleet was holding its ground, the question remained, would they survive this? Would humanity's hidden strength be enough to overcome the seemingly unstoppable force that was the Invictus? Lyris looked to the sky, her heart heavy, but her resolve unwavering. The war was not over, but the memory of those they had lost would guide them. They would fight until the end, no matter the cost. For Bonner, for humanity, for their survival. As the battle in the skies raged on, humanity found itself at a precipice. The Zorathians, relentless in their assault, were still proving to be a formidable force, even with the arrival of the human fleet. The Invictus, their flagship, loomed in the distance, a symbol of their unyielding might. The tide of war seemed to be shifting in humanity's favor, but there was still no guarantee of victory. The Zorathians had held their ground for far too long, and the human forces, despite their hidden strengths, were pushing their limits. Captain Lyris stood at the command center, her face grim as she watched the ongoing battle unfold on the holographic display. The human fleet had made considerable progress, but the Invictus remained a looming threat. The sheer size and power of the flagship were unlike anything humanity had ever faced. It was a beast of war, an unstoppable force. The human ships were battling valiantly, but without a decisive edge. It seemed they would lose this fight just as they had so many others. But the humans had one final secret weapon, one that had been kept hidden for years. A weapon so powerful, so devastating, that it was the last hope in turning the tide of battle. "The Titan is ready," said a voice behind Captain Lyris, pulling her from her thoughts. It was the voice of her trusted officer, Thorn. "We can deploy it now, Captain." It's our only shot at taking down the Invictus. Lyris hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. She knew the stakes were higher than ever before. The Titan-class battleship was humanity's greatest creation, an eye-controlled warship the size of a small moon. It was the pinnacle of human engineering and technology, a weapon that no other race had ever seen. Equipped with energy weapons of unimaginable power, it could disable entire fleets with a single pulse. It was humanity's last chance, but using it would not come without risk. "Deploy it," Lyris ordered, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision. A massive rumble shook the command deck as the Titan-class battleship was activated. The ship, which had been hidden in the depths of space, now emerged from the shadows, revealing its sheer size and might. The Zorethian fleet turned their attention to the new arrival, and for the first time, a sense of dread spread among their ranks. The Titan moved with incredible speed, its hull glowing with an ominous energy. It was unlike anything the Zorethians had ever encountered. Its weapons hummed with power, and the vast array of energy conduits running along its exterior pulsed as if alive. This was a ship built for one purpose: destruction. "All units, prepare to engage," Captain Lyris commanded. "This is our moment." As the Titan positioned itself at the heart of the battle, the Zorethians launched a barrage of attacks, hoping to overwhelm the massive warship. But the Titan's cloaking shield absorbed the incoming fire with ease, rendering the Zorethian weapons useless. With a single, swift movement, the Titan unleashed a devastating energy pulse, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The Zorethian ships closest to the blast were disintegrated instantly, their once formidable forms reduced to nothing but debris. The humans watched in awe as the Titan's energy beams tore through the Zorethian fleet. The blasts created a spectacle of destruction, a fiery trail of annihilation, as the beams ripped through enemy ships, disabling them one by one. The Zorethians, unable to comprehend the power of the Titan, scrambled to regroup, but their efforts were futile. The tide of the battle was changing, and the humans were finally gaining the upper hand. But even as the Zorethian fleet crumbled before them, the Invictus remained unscathed. The massive ship was still a formidable opponent, its weapons primed and ready to strike. It was not just another warship. It was the heart of the Zorethian military, the symbol of their invincibility. And the Titan, for all its might, would have to face it head-on. Lyris watched as the Titan's energy beams continued to wreak havoc on the Zorethian ships. The enemy fleet was being torn apart, but the Invictus still hovered in the distance, a dark shadow that threatened to undo everything the humans had fought for. The battle was far from over. "Captain, we've got the Invictus in our sights," Thorne said, his voice tense with anticipation. "The Titan is ready to engage. We need to strike now." Lyris nodded, her mind already calculating the next move. The Invictus was powerful, but it wasn't invincible. The Titan had the strength to destroy it, if it could get close enough. The distance between the two ships was narrowing, and soon they would be within range. The Titan's massive engines roared to life as it accelerated toward the Invictus. The Zorethians, seeing their flagship in danger, launched a final offensive. Thousands of missiles and energy blasts rained down on the Titan, but the ship's eye-controlled systems expertly deflected the attacks, sending them back into space. The Titan was untouchable, a perfect weapon in the hands of humanity. As the Titan closed in on the Invictus, the final showdown was imminent. The two ships were now locked in a deadly dance in the vast expanse of space. The Invictus fired its main cannons, massive beams of energy that collided with the Titan's shields. The resulting explosion lit up the battlefield like a supernova, but the Titan held firm, its shields absorbing the energy with ease. In a flash, the Titan fired back. The beam it unleashed was so powerful that it seemed to tear the fabric of space itself. It struck the Invictus directly, and the Zorethian flagship shuddered under the immense pressure. The once mighty ship began to crack and splinter, its systems failing one by one. The Invictus fired one last desperate shot before it was completely obliterated, the massive ship breaking apart in a spectacular display of destruction. For a moment, there was silence. But even as the humans celebrated their hard-fought victory, Captain Lyris couldn't shake the feeling that the war was not yet over. The destruction of the Invictus was a major blow to the Zorethians, but they were a ruthless empire. They would regroup, they would rebuild, and humanity would have to be ready for whatever came next. Lyris stood on the command deck, her heart heavy with both relief and uncertainty. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The Titan had given humanity the edge, but they had paid a heavy price. The losses they had suffered, both in soldiers and loved ones, would never be forgotten. Yet, in the ashes of war, humanity had shown its true strength. And in the end, that was what would see them through to the final victory. "Prepare for the next phase of the war," Lyris ordered, her voice steady once more. "We've only just begun." The stars twinkled coldly above the battlefield as the final showdown approached. The Zorethian flagship, the Invictus, remained a dark and menacing presence at the heart of the war. The humans had managed to strike down much of the Zorethian fleet, and their fleet now hovered on the edge of victory. But it was clear that defeating the Invictus would be their greatest challenge. This massive warship, an eye-controlled behemoth, was not just the backbone of the Zorethian Empire's military force. It was a symbol of their power. Its weapons were deadly, its shields nearly impenetrable, and its AI system so sophisticated that it could predict the humans' every move. Captain Lyris stood at the command center, her eyes fixed on the Invictus on the view screen. The battlefield was chaotic, with the remnants of the Zorethian fleet retreating, but the Invictus was still undeterred. The human fleet had delivered devastating blows, yet there was something about this ship that made it seem invincible. Lyris knew that the real battle wasn't won yet. The Invictus was the key to the war, and until it was destroyed, humanity could never be truly safe. "We can't go on like this," Lyris muttered to herself. "We need a way to disable their AI before it tears us apart." Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Thorne, stepped beside her, eyes grim. "We've got a plan, Captain. It's risky, but it's the only shot we've got." Lyris nodded, her mind racing. The humans had developed a weapon that could potentially neutralize the Invictus, an EMP device capable of shutting down the warship's eye. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was their only option. The EMP had to be planted directly on the Invictus, deep within its core. The only way to do this was to board the ship itself. "All units, prepare for the final assault," Captain Lyris ordered, her voice firm. "This is it." The plan was simple in concept, but complicated in execution. The human fleet would distract the Invictus with a barrage of firepower, drawing the attention of the flagship's automated defenses. Meanwhile, a small team of human soldiers would board the Invictus via transport pods, slip past its defenses, and plant the EMP device inside the ship. Once the device was triggered, the Invictus's eye would collapse, rendering the flagship powerless. The humans had only one shot at this, and the clock was ticking. The human fleet moved into position, their ships ready for the final confrontation. The Invictus responded, launching waves of energy blasts that lit up the dark void of space. The Zorethians were fighting with everything they had left, knowing that their future depended on the survival of their flagship. They were determined to make this the humans' last stand. The battle that ensued was brutal. The human fleet unleashed its full might, firing on all cylinders, their ships dodging and weaving through the barrage of Zorethian fire. Explosions erupted around them as shields flickered and hulls cracked under pressure. But the Invictus was far from finished. Its weapons fired relentlessly, cutting through human ships like a scythe through wheat. The human forces pushed forward, knowing that their only hope lay in boarding the enemy ship. Inside the cockpit of one of the human transports, Lyris's team prepared for the most dangerous mission of their lives. The team of soldiers, led by Lyris's trusted Lieutenant Thorne, was ready, They suited up in their advanced battle armor, faces grim, knowing that they might not make it back. But this was it, the final gamble. Either the Invictus would fall, or humanity would lose everything. The transport pods launched, speeding toward the Invictus like missiles streaking across the night sky. The Zorathian fleet tried to intercept them, but the human ships provided enough cover to allow the pods to reach their destination. With a loud thud, the pods made contact with the Invictus, attaching themselves to the flagship's hull. "Go, go, go," Thorn shouted, his voice amplified through the comms. The team of soldiers rushed out of the pods, their weapons at the ready. They had to move quickly. The longer they stayed outside the Invictus, the more likely they were to be spotted by the ship's air defense systems. Every second mattered. They advanced into the belly of the beast, cutting through the Zorathian defenses with precision and speed. Every hallway they moved through was alive with the hum of the Invictus's eye-controlled systems, its automated turrets and drones lying in wait. But the humans were ready. They fought with fierce determination, cutting down drone after drone, soldier after soldier, until they reached the heart of the flagship, the AI core. As the team planted the EMP device in place, Lyris's voice came through their comms. "Is the EMP ready?" she asked, her voice steady but anxious. "Ready, Captain," Thorn replied. "We're about to make history." The EMP device was activated, sending a pulse of energy through the ship's systems. The Invictus shuddered as its AI was struck. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the ship's automated systems began to shut down. The AI that had controlled the Invictus for so long was collapsing. Lights flickered, and the once smooth hum of the ship turned into chaotic grinding noises as the systems went offline. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The explosion of energy that followed the EMP pulse rocked the Invictus to its core. Lyris's team was thrown to the ground, the shockwave knocking them off their feet. The ship's defenses failed, and the Zorathians were now left vulnerable. But the humans had no time to celebrate. The ship was on the verge of collapse, and the Invictus wasn't done yet. The Zorathian soldiers who were still alive fought to the bitter end. It was a desperate struggle, a battle for survival, but the human soldiers pressed on, clearing the ship one section at a time. The Invictus was dying, but it was not going down without a fight. Then came the final blow. The Invictus's main reactor exploded, sending a shockwave of energy that shook the entire battlefield. The ship, once the symbol of Zorathian power, broke apart in a fiery display of destruction. Debris rained down onto the battlefield as the massive warship crumbled, finally defeated. As the smoke cleared, Lyris stood on the command deck, staring at the wreckage of the Invictus. The battle had been won, but the price had been steep. Many of her soldiers had fallen. Some were injured beyond recovery. The cost of victory had been far higher than she had ever imagined. But despite the heavy losses, there was a sense of relief. The Invictus was gone. The Zorathian Empire had lost its strongest weapon, and humanity had secured a crucial victory. The war was far from over, but the humans had shown that they could stand against the greatest power in the galaxy and win. "We did it," Lyris whispered to herself, her voice filled with a mix of triumph and sorrow. But at what cost? The Zorathians were defeated, but the war was far from over. The battle had been won, but the road ahead would be long. The humans would have to rebuild, to heal, and to prepare for whatever the future held. But one thing was certain: the human spirit had proven itself to be stronger than the mightiest empire in the galaxy. As the crew celebrated their hard-fought victory, Lyris looked to the stars. The war was not over, but for the first time, the humans could see the possibility of peace on the horizon. The destruction of the Invictus marked a turning point, not just in the war, but in the history of humanity. The Zorathian Empire, once a seemingly invincible force, was now crumbling under the weight of its own losses. The human fleet, once underestimated and ignored by the galaxy, had proved that they were more than capable of standing toe-to-toe with the most powerful military forces in the universe. And the results were undeniable. The Invictus lay in ruins, a broken symbol of the Empire's dominance, while humanity emerged victorious, though at a great cost. Captain Laris stood on the bridge of the flagship, her eyes scanning the battlefield. The remnants of the Zorathian fleet were scattered across the stars, some ships still burning from the human onslaught, others simply drifting in space, abandoned and powerless. The once proud fleet that had threatened to conquer the galaxy was now little more than space debris. Yet, despite the overwhelming victory, Laris felt an unsettling silence settle over her. The loss of so many comrades weighed heavily on her heart. The faces of those who had fallen in battle flashed before her eyes. Bonner, the soldier who had sacrificed himself to save her. The brave men and women who had boarded the Invictus with her, knowing full well they might never return. The victory had been hard-earned, but it was bittersweet. The crew of the flagship was silent as well, their exhaustion and grief palpable in the air. No one spoke much, but the bond they shared was undeniable. They had fought together, bled together, and now they stood victorious together. But the emotional cost of this victory would take time to heal. "We didn't fight this battle for ourselves," Lyris said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but the weight of her words was heavy. "We fought to show them what we're capable of." The galaxy had seen what humans could do when pushed to the edge. They weren't just survivors. They were masters of warfare. Their fleet, once hidden away in the shadows, had proven itself to be a force to be reckoned with. The Zorathian Empire had underestimated them, as had every other power in the galaxy. But now, humanity had made its mark. The galaxy would no longer dismiss them as a primitive species. They had earned their place among the stars. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. The Zorathian Empire had been shattered, but there were still threats lurking in the galaxy. The humans had won a significant victory, but the consequences of this war would ripple through the universe for years to come. Humanity had proven that they could fight, but now they would have to prove that they could build, that they could lead, and that they could live with the consequences of their actions. Lyris stepped out onto the observation deck of the flagship, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond. The blackness of space seemed endless, stretching out into the unknown. There was a sense of peace here, in the stillness of the moment, but it was only temporary. The universe was vast, and there were always new challenges on the horizon. But for now, Lyris allowed herself a moment of reflection. The Invictus was gone, the Zorathian threat had been neutralized, and humanity had proven its strength. The journey ahead would be long, and the road to peace would be hard-earned. But for the first time in a long while, Lyris felt a sense of hope. The humans had a future in this galaxy, and it was up to them to decide what they would make of it. Looking up at the stars, Lyris couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would humanity continue to grow and expand, or would they face new threats, new enemies who would seek to tear them down? The war had been won, but the battle for humanity's place in the galaxy was just beginning. What would they do with this newfound power? What path would they choose? The question hung in the air, unanswered. But for now, humanity had a place in the galactic order. They had earned it with their blood, their sacrifice, and their resilience. The future was uncertain, but it was no longer something to fear. Humanity had proven that they could survive, that they could fight, and that they could win. As Lyris stood there, her mind filled with thoughts of the future, she was reminded of one simple truth. The war was over, but their journey had only just begun. And with that, she turned away from the stars, ready to face whatever the future held. The humans had come a long way, and now they had a place in the galaxy. The road ahead would be difficult, but humanity had proven its strength. Together, they would face whatever challenges awaited them, and they would do so with the same resolve that had carried them through this war. The dawn of a new era had begun, and humanity was ready to take its place among the stars.